Hello, Dr. Parker. This is Eddie Knighton, and this is my critical reflection on EDL 523. Before the course, I didn't necessarily lack confidence in my research ability. It's stated in everything I pretty much submitted in this course, in the pre and post surveys and the project reflection. My degree is in history, which is essentially a degree in research. So, I'm familiar with research. However, this course did change the way I think about research by giving me a deeper and more sophisticated understanding of three aspects. The first is, the real difference between qualitative and quantitative research. The second is the importance of pre-planning, and the third aspect is the idea or introducing the idea of action-based research. For quantitative versus qualitative research, I knew beforehand the vague differences between the two. Qualitative is narrative, it's more subjective. It was 100% of what I did when I was an undergraduate and when I did in history. I would find, read, interpret the words of historians who found, read, and interpreted the works and primary sources of other historians. Their statistics and numbers were referenced in supporting the narrative, such as, I don't know, at the time of the American Revolution, there was only 20 million people in the colonies and so on. And I would say things in my presentation and in my papers like statistical analysis support Gary Nash's thesis that blah blah blah. And in a sense, because I thought I was referring to statistics and numbers, I actually thought that I was doing quantitative research in a way. Therefore, sort of always had this idea of quantitative research as being superior because it has numbers. It's what scientists do. And I guess I thought that I wasn't really smart enough for that and that my mind didn't work that way. I've always had more of an artistic mind. And adversely, I would say that qualitative research was inferior. It's what people who aren't, smart enough to to do science and be scientists do when they try to sound smart. So I always sort of never fully appreciated sociologists and psychologists and educational researchers because I always felt like they kind of were pretenders trying to be scientific with their quantitative studies about people's emotion-based stories and their feelings. More of the sort of a quantitative approach to the humanities. And now, because of this course, I recognize the difference between qualitative and quantitative. It's not necessarily a difference between fields such as scientists versus humanities. It's actually different research approaches that can be applied in whatever field you're in. So, that's at the age of 41 with a history degree. I have to admit that that's a little embarrassing for me just now to be coming to that realization. The second is the importance of pre-planning. Um, I've always flattered myself by suggesting that I have a kamikaze sort of research style. I've never really been one to, in my undergraduate, to form a thesis or a problem statement. In history, I let the resources paint the picture as I went. And that was exciting to me. And for the most part, I thought that that's kind of what research was about, is, letting the data draw those conclusions. Like, in an example, my senior thesis in 2010, I began with a starting point of the modernization of downtown Hendersonville, which is a city in Henderson County between 1880 and World War One. However, 2 semesters later, my end result was a 50-page paper discussing how the city borrowed money to build a jail, and them started jailing people for not paying their taxes. And within a year, they were able to pay the prison off and had enough money to begin to develop the infrastructure and pave the streets and build hydroelectric dams and such things. And I'm proud of it. It was nominated for a Best NC History. But as far as planning, I did none of that. I just went into it like a reporter of history. However, I realized all along the fact that my paper was good in spite of the lack of planning and not because of it, such as I claim. And a very good reason for that is I didn't have the planning process. And even in my historiography and history courses, it didn't really discuss a planning process. And to the right here, I took this straight from the book where it identifies the problem and states the research. This is the educational research cycle. And I would forego these first, the ones in red. And I would immediately start, just analyzing data and drawing conclusions and writing it down. So in a sense, of course, I didn't really understand the difference between qualitative and quantitative research because I absolutely did not know what I was doing. If I would have implemented this, if I was, given the topic like, Eddie, you will do your paper on the modernization of Hendersonville, I would have probably been bogged down, felt a little closed in. But if I would have followed this cycle, I could have probably replicated a better paper in half the time. Because one of the drawbacks of not pre-planning is research and writing is a laborious issue. And that causes procrastination and reluctance. And I probably, if I would have had these tools, I probably would have just kept up my momentum and went straight into graduate school and not waited until I'm 41 to figure out what I want to do when I grow up. The last is action-based research. I talked to this extensively in our project and throughout the semester. I love this realization. And this is a quote from the book that I've used several times now. Many practitioners find that formal academic research is neither helpful nor applicable to their particular setting. This is largely because traditional education researchers sometimes impose research findings on schools with little or no attention paid to the local variation and required adaptation. And this was actually sort of an epiphany because, as stated with my misunderstanding about research, I've always thought that research was something for PhDs in the academics. I didn't think that it was for anyone that's not qualified to do research. And the whole principle of action-based research is to create a reflexive and self-checking cyclical work habit that where you can research and correct and implement these in your local environments to make your professional environment more efficient. And the possibilities are endless. You can absolutely research how to improve anything. In addition, it removes the certain amount of pressure because as a history undergrad, they just prepare you for grad school and eventually PhD. Your audience as a researcher and writer is your professor and academics and potential peer reviews. And action-based research is more of like a democratization of research. It's hands-on, it's practical. You can see almost immediate results. It's flexible, it's malleable. It can be formal or informal as necessary. It depends upon the researcher's ability to self-correct, be objective, and be reflexive. These are areas that I'm relatively adept in personally. I'm pretty self-aware, and I'm interested in making this a professional habit. This was an informal presentation. I just put some things from Mettler to illustrate my points in the background, and I treated this almost as a diary because it's sort of a self-reflection about my experience in EDL 523. It's only surface level from what I've taken from the course, which I assure you is a lot. And I'd like to thank you, Dr. Parker, for your time and moderating it. Thank you very much.